At the Global Liver Institute, we believe it all starts with a patient. So what happens when a patient, a liver patient no less, one of the 500 million people living with conditions that often go undiagnosed, untreated, or misdiagnosed, mistreated, and stigmatized, brings the challenges of liver patients front and center? And what happens when a patient then leads a discussion with world experts in policy, research, clinical care, and wellness on ways to overcome these challenges? Let's find out today on GLI Live. Hello and welcome. I am Donna Cryer, the CEO and founder of the Global Liver Institute, and we are live. This is not a drill. Today we are responding to the incredible, impactful breaking news of yesterday. If you're watching, that was March 14th, so happy Pi Day to everybody for yesterday. But we are recognizing the FDA approval in the United States of Resmetirom, now called Resmetirom, as the brand name that you will be hearing more of, and talking with experts about the road ahead, because the work is just beginning now with an FDA approval. And so with me to discuss that, I have some world-class experts that range from obesity medicine, gastroenterology, hepatology, both physician and nursing, because you know that's important to us. And I might add a little patient perspective here and there. But so welcome, Dr. Janese Laster, Dr. Amreen Dinani, and Louise Campbell. You are recognized in Royal Societies of Medicine, and so you're at least a doctorate and expert in your field. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I might just start with initial reactions to the fact. I may read actually from the FDA press release, so we can all be on the same page about what we are discussing. They approved Resmetirom for the treatment of adults with non-cirrhotic, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis NASH with moderate to advanced liver scarring, fibrosis, to be used along with diet and exercise. So that's what actually happened. That's the official FDA language. What happened in each of your worlds once that came over the wires? And I'll start with you, Amreen.
So I think I probably refreshed my browsers multiple times before that, statement came out. And then when it did, it was very exciting. But I think the most exciting part for me was that we have removed biopsy from the diagnosis or how we're going to allow patients to get onto this medication. But as I was mentioning, also how we we're targeting patients with moderate to severe fibrosis, which corresponds to F2 and F3. So I think it's really going to capture a big bulk of our patients. So to me, that's super exciting. I think very strategically, very nicely done, because it will allow more access to patients because they're not restricted by very specialized testing that, as we know, can be inaccurate. So we're not going to be heavily relying on a liver biopsy. So to me, that's super exciting.
Absolutely. Rather what we talk about in regulatory as a clean label. So Dr. Laster, what has been the initial response from your perspective?
I will, first of all, completely echo that without having this liver biopsy was sort of a dream come true, first of all, because I don't remember the last time I biopsied someone. This was when I was even working at Liver Transplant Institute. You just didn't, that was not something you really needed unless it was really a confusing thing or somebody had some type of rare disorder. So I thought that was amazing, first of all. But secondly, just for patients in general, I think it's still sort of a disease that people don't really understand or know about. And so when they come to clinic to see me for obesity management, and I'm getting all of their sort of baseline labs and looking at their imaging, and I bring it up and I say, oh, I see you have a history of X. They're like, No one has ever told me that. I don't know what that is. And so it used to be that all I could say was, well, I could tell them all the potential bad things that were going to happen. But all I could offer and say is, you know what, but we're really going to work hard on it and try to change your dietary habits, change your exercise habits, and get weight loss, because we know that will work. And so you could just see like that distraught face that comes up, because they've been told that their entire lives about every other medical problem, right? And they've been trying. And so this was like, sun coming out to have something that you can offer in addition to those other things that we're doing. So to sort of move the needle and give them some hope, because I've just given them this diagnosis and explained it to them, and they're thinking, oh my goodness, I never drank a day in my life and I'm going to be cirrhotic. It's where their mind goes, So I think it was incredible news.
I remember talking to a member of the U.S. Marine Corps who had been diagnosed with NASH, and the look on his face when basically, after all was said and done, he was like, "You mean there's nothing for me?" And he was just crestfallen. He was somebody who had like taken charge in every other aspect of his life, but he had this diagnosis, and then was hearing from the healthcare system that there was nothing. And so now we have something that's very specific for NASH, a liver-directed therapy, and so I think that's, for many patients, that will simply mean that we've been heard, that we feel recognized, and for most liver patients who have lived with incredible stigma and underdiagnosis and undertreatment and been told to sort of go away, there's nothing you can do. Just that being able to stand with your physician and saying that there are things that we have worked on for you is something very meaningful. And Louise, you are out in the field, rapidly discovering people and having these conversations and breaking the hard news with people that they have NASH. So the tenor of those conversations gets to change. But tell us what you've been experiencing in this brief point in time since this approval in the U.S.
Well, I think I'm sitting in London, so
right.
I expected the news about 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock Washington time. So the more it got delayed, the more I'm thinking, do we have an issue? We've been here with obeticholic acid. So it happened quite late for the UK. I think I then jumped on the Madrigal press conference, which meant it was very late. But I think overnight, the news has been very encouraging. The news has been spread, obviously. It's something we've all been waiting for. But I think what struck me was not only is this a massive day for patients with fatty liver disease, it was what it is going to do for the awareness of liver health. We now have a medication that is once a day oral, that's allowable with no contraindications, that have currently been isolated and without a biopsy. So I'd like to thank every patient who's ever had a biopsy to be able to derive this amount of data from the Resmetirom trials, but also the amount of non-invasive data that was done. It is a red letter day, but also the ability to use that and look for patients now in endocrinology, cardiology. We can now push the needle of poor liver health from this one platform. And I think that is vitally important. And that's what I've been reflecting on in the last 24 hours, is the need for non-invasive opportunities at the front line to talk to people and educate. We want to prevent the ones to get to F2 and F3. We want to locate the F2 and F3 to treat. And by doing it, we'll locate the F4 to be able to put into care earlier. So ramifications from this, for me, are massive. And I think for blood-based biomarkers, non-invasive technologies like FibroScan, which I use a lot, but that discussion with patients and future patients.
There is, and as we are part of this, episode is to sort of lay a marker in history for how we got here. So we're not just sort of lost in the celebration. And it was a big point whether biopsies would be required. And when we started the GLI Nash Council in 2017, specifically at the Milken Institute School of Public Health, to anchor this in public health, and surrounded ourselves with endocrinologists and cardiologists, and everyone to build a bigger tent. The issue of needing non-invasive technologies to be able to treat, to be able to identify the numbers involved was important. And so, our Beyond the Biopsy campaign and the patients who came forward to describe what, the barrier biopsy would be to either participation in future trials or to care in our patient-focused drug development meeting that we did with FDA, all of those things, and the Litmus Consortium and the FNIH NIMBLE Consortium. And so for people to know the years of work, not only on the research side, but the diagnostic side, on the advocacy side, to be able to result in what we're seeing today is really important, and why we're both so excited and so tired. So I want to go back to Dr. Dinani about, okay, so you have patients who fit this study population, who fit this label, of moderate to severe, consistent with F2 and F3. What are you telling them today? Because they're calling your office. So what are you telling them today?
I mean, I've already have patients who've contacted me since this approval saying, hey, do you think I can get this drug? So, I mean, I currently rely pretty heavily on my non-invasive tests to be able to, risk stratify patient populations.
Right. And which tests? Because we have to be specific.
Sure.
Here, is it a FIB4? Is it built into your EHR, or do you have, ELF? Do you have, fiber scans up and down the hallway?
We have all of it.
What can patients expect?
We have all of it. We've worked very hard in our healthcare system. So we have FIB4 in our EHR, which allows us to do the initial risk stratification or primary assessment to risk stratify patients. As we know, it performs really well in ruling out cirrhosis or advanced fibrosis, and a score of less than 1.3. You can be pretty confident that they can stay with their primary care physician or their diabetologist, for instance. We have access to FibroScan at our institution, and really anyone, as per the indications, anyone with potentially with a FibroScan liver stiffness score of 8 and higher would qualify for treatment. We also have ELF now in our healthcare system. We have been able to incorporate that into our EMR. And I think that's a very useful tool. Again, that's a test that has been very well validated to detect advanced fibrosis and also prognosticate outcomes. But I think that's going to be a very useful test when we are monitoring, following up these patients while they're being treated. So, FIB4 initially. If you have access to a FibroScan, that's great. If you don't have access to a FibroScan, I think you can use an ELF test. I think the messaging really is use a layered sequential form of non-invasive tests, whether it's imaging-based, whether it's serum-based, to try truly identify that patient population. The big thing is we want to make sure they're not cirrhotic, and the other big thing is we're also not targeting them too early. But going back to what you asked me, yes, it's been approved. It's not going to be until April that we will have it. We have to build this medication into our EHR systems like we all do. In the United States, it's going to be reimbursed to specialty pharmacies initially. So, I think there's going to be lots of support around how do you navigate that, prior authorizations and things like that. And I think the company has, put a lot of thought into how do you support that. And I think the other thing I think about is how do we make it available for everybody? Right? Not just people who can afford it because they have commercial insurance, but how do we make it available to people who can afford it or who don't have insurance? And I think there are programs and a lot of thought around that as well. And I think this is also, for me, the interesting piece is that, there are certain populations that we did not test this medication on. And I think very proactively in the real world, we should try to get those patient populations treated to truly see the benefits of these medications. So I think we have a drug approval, but we still have a few more steps that we need to put into place, like in our EHR systems? How are we going to get prior auth for these patient populations? How are we going to monitor these patients, right, once they start them? Though there isn't any specific monitoring that's been, advised or guided in the indication, we know that the liver test, for instance, can go up. So I think there's going to be a bit of a learning curve as we use it in the real world versus our clinical trial world. But
that's a great start.
Do it.
Right. Dr. Laster, you are in a different, you're in a community practice rather than at an academic center. So what does this look like for you in your conversations and your offering to patients? And then we will answer the question that has been posed by one of our viewers. But first, what does it look like in a community practice?
So in a community practice, we often have less of the beautiful fancy tests than they have at academic centers that I got very accustomed to during fellowship. So I had to figure that out a little bit.
You have better scales though.
I do have better scales. That is true. So we have our in-body scales. I can look at visceral fat and other things like that. So I'm excited about that. But so I have to depend a little bit more on serum tests and imaging that people have already had done. But a lot of really I base it on like FIB4 and serum testing a lot. So, but I think so many of the things that she brought up are so true. I think there'll be some hiccups in the beginning and us figuring out how often these patients need to follow up, when we need to repeat their blood tests, when we need to repeat, are we calculating FIB4 for the first, 6 months and then getting a repeat serum test. I think that part will be sort of how we, like we do everything else, we figure it out as we go along, and then we use data to say, oh, okay, this is what we probably will be a little bit too aggressive in the beginning, and then we'll scale it back a little bit. But I think that will be the interesting part for me, is sort of trying to not go overboard in testing and to determine sort of how well a patient is responding, and sort of in our comparison to, because it's real world when they're on other medications and other things are going on and they're not sort of, in my practice, they will be regimented with diet and exercise, but sort of in other practices, maybe not. So I think that will be interesting too, to see if they are, being monitored for those sort of lifestyle changes and how well those patients do versus others. So I think there are a lot of interesting things that are going to come with real world practice.
I do want to give a shout out to our friends at LabCorp for adding platelets to their liver health panel so that a FIB4 could be calculated from that, because that's a really important part of being able to have, scale access for everybody to be able to have this, for a primary care physician or anybody being able to sort of check a box and have the liver panel be able to calculate this. So whether you're in a rural clinic, a rural GI or hepatologist, or or in downtown, Research Triangle Park, you can still have the same done. Let me answer a question and then I'll come to you, Louise. So the question we got from one of our viewers is, any trials of this on post-transplant patients who start to develop fatty deposits on their transplanted livers? You are a person after my own heart. I did ask that question in a conversation we were able to have with the company, who's been very active in their engagement with the patient advocacy community. And the answer is they have not studied that yet. And that is an area that is ripe for an investor-initiated study. We at GLI will certainly be talking to investigators about initiating that study and trying to find support for that study. Specifically, some of the transplant medicine cyclosporin are in the label as not something that you would want with this drug. But we don't know about tacrolimus, which is the most commonly prescribed, drug and what most transplant recipients are on. So for future study is the question. Louise, what would you like to see as this, who's next? Are we going to see this in Canada and the UK? EMA has this, teed up for evaluation. Tell us, I know our patients outside the US are eager to have this as well. What does that look like?
Well, I think you're right. The EMA have obviously accepted it as well. Great news, I think, for Europe, and they will get access to it a little bit quicker. I think the UK method is we would use the MHRA to then review the EMA, but they may choose to do that in tandem. And I don't know how that's going to work. whether or not we would have to go through a NICE, National Institute of Care Excellence review for medication. I think from the meeting last night, it's priced at $47,000 per year. But they do have a program for those who don't have access to healthcare. So they have ticked a lot of boxes to be able to support patients into this. That was a sort of medium figure, I think, from the ISA review last year. So they've done that quite nicely. And I think if you offset that against biopsy costs and all of the others, then you may find that that comes in quite nicely. So I don't know about the UK. Obviously, I work within the Australian area as well. Now, there's an issue there. FibroScan is, for example, is not on Medicare. We don't have ELF that I'm aware of particularly well in the country. And we are about to lead with ultrasound as the main location for fatty liver. Well, that's obviously not going to tell us NASH. It's not going to give us any gauge of fibrosis levels and KPAs. So I don't know how it will roll out in an Australian system. But for me, as somebody who advises and puts in expert FibroScan services, the potential to give people what they want at a high skill level immediately actually becomes very relevant to the rollout of these medications into less experienced areas. And I think for me, it's about the information given to the patient or client, because a lot of people I see are people who choose to access information on their liver health to be aware and in control, as well as healthcare. So I think I noticed yesterday it's about educating physicians. These patients will have often engaged with a FibroScan and a nurse or a practitioner of a different kind before they meet my esteemed colleagues on this panel and anybody else, and will have had to have a conversation. So it changes my narrative in healthcare as the fact there is something becoming available because of this, but it doesn't change the narrative about if I've got a FibroScan of 8 and a high ALT, AST, that actually they may be the wrong criteria for this medication because they're going to fall below that threshold potentially on further investigation. So it's about awareness of that conversation and the information. And remember, this medication is to be given for those on dietary and exercise. It is not just you have to tick the box on liver F2 or F3. You have to be engaged in a program. That is not something that we do particularly well in the UK.
Or in the US.
Or in the US.
And so, Dr. Laster, I'm going to come to you because you have really been standing in the breach, filling the gaps in that lack of comprehensive, diet, exercise, coaching, giving people real practical advice and steps to surround the medication, any medications that they might be given. And so, in this landscape that now includes GLP-1s, for weight loss, now specific NASH medications, what does the conversation with the patient look like as you sort of walk them through the different options and who might be appropriate for what?
Yeah, I get it, Louise. In this country, that's why I started my practice. It was because I saw all of these patients with all of these diseases, and I was given 15 minutes. I was like, well, that doesn't cut it. If I get to see them, every 6 months, these people need consistent follow-up. And so, I think that it takes education, a lot of patient education, because we're all so confused, and in this country in particular, on like what is healthy eating. And sort of, people are not eating enough. They're eating too much. They're eating too much processed food. They're not eating, it just sort of spans because all of the advertising things look great on the labels. They say, oh, gluten-free, fat-free, low sodium, plant-based. They have all these buzzwords and patients are confused because I don't know what. So I think it's super important for them to have that consistent follow-up and to be able to understand what's going to fit into their days, and really just going back to the basics and teach people about food in general, and really getting people to pay attention to what they're actually taking in. If you ask the average person, do you eat healthy? The answer is going to be yes. When you ask them how many servings of fruit do they have per day, they are like, how many servings of vegetables do you have per day? They're like, well, what's a serving? what do you mean by, do you get 20, 25 grams of fiber per day? I'm
Like, what is that?
What?
Yeah, what's a gram?
Exactly. Right. And then they always say, oh, but I get enough protein. This is all we care about in this country is, how much protein we're getting. But we think of protein as like, all of these massively, meat substances or pork, all those other things that put you at risk still for fatty liver because they're saturated fat and all those other stuff, right? So showing people, and they still don't usually get enough protein. I'm like, I'm plant-based and I still get more protein than you. I still beat your breakfast. So I think that's the fun part, is sort of showing patients, taking them on that kind of journey, and having them sort of discover, really, that's what I'm getting in per day. I sort of joke that tell them, I'm like, I'm going to do your recall and I'm going to show it back to you and tell you, this is sort of what your day is like. This is how much protein, this is how much fiber, this is how many calories you get per day. And this is what you need based on that cool machine Donna was talking about, our in-body machine. We can tell patients what their basal metabolic rate is. So, and what they need for weight maintenance versus loss. And I tell them, I joke that it's like the checkbook register my mom had, right? So she didn't spend money the way we do with like phones, like it's, someone else's, like somebody else pay for it for us. They paid attention to it, right? So when people pay attention to that by us giving it to them, they're like, really? That's what I'm getting in every day? Because we ignore some of those other things, right? You ignore, and as physicians, we are guilty because the nurses will bring stuff. They're like, oh, doc, have this. And I forget about all those little nibbles I've had walking, from my procedures. And people don't count the Starbucks in the morning, that venti they got. You just don't count those things. You're like, oh, no, those don't exist. But when they're sitting in my office and they're recounting, they're like, crap. Why do you have to bring the snack up? Why do you have to, because all of those things matter, right?
Because your body registers it, whether
your body, your body
not.
counted it. Yeah, your body didn't kick that out. So showing people measurable ways to be able to do that, how to make it fun, not making it restrictive, which I think is one of the other social media things I have to combat all the time, of, carnivore diet or keto or all these other things. People are like, oh, I just can't do it. I'm like, yeah, it's the reason you can't do it, because it's not sustainable. So taking them through that journey, letting them have those peaks and valleys, and letting them see, they're like, oh, but I have to eat this thing. I'm like, okay, tell me how you feel about it. And a couple of weeks later, they're like, all right, fine, you were right, I'm bloated when I have that. So getting people to sort of recognize things on their own. So I think these medications are only tools. So Donna and I are together advocating all the time on Congress about people thinking medications are crutches. And I'm like, no, we need them. We need them to help us push people to the goalposts, to get them over that hump so they don't feel like they're just left out, floundering around. So so that's why I'm excited, because I love what I can have as the tool in my toolbox. The more tools I have, because everything doesn't work for everybody, getting people to understand that you can't outrun what you eat. You can't outthink what you eat. You have this is such an important part of your entire total health. So I'm over the moon about it. Yeah.
Janice, you speak my language.
I know. So these are my people.
Yeah, you speak my language. I don't even think I use the word diet in my clinic. I don't use the word exercise in my clinic.
Nope.
And I have a very similar approach. I think I spend half my time with the patient talking about food, their relationship with food. And I basically say, listen, I'd like to know what you eat, and then I'm going to teach you how to eat it better.
Yep, exactly.
Right? Because I can't make you eat what I eat, because
that's what I tell them.
What I eat, right? So you see, we speak the same language.
I love it.
And that's because you all are like quadruple board certified in obesity medicine, as well as gastroenterology and other things.
We're nerdy together. I love it.
I think it's because we do this all day, and then you bring it into your real life, and you do it to yourself, and then you do it to everybody else. So
right. But this is the context and the kind of conversations that we're going to have around this new medication, because it's not just about taking the medication and wiping hands. It really has to be in the context of changing your lifestyle, getting monitored, just recognizing that this is a serious progressive disease that we now have the opportunity to do active things about before people end up on a transplant list or a diagnosis of liver cancer. And so there needs to be sort of active work by all parts, by the advanced practice providers and nurses, by the physicians, having a different type of conversation and a real conversation with specifics in with their patients, and with people who are living with this condition, to really realize that there's going to need to be, engagement, and not just education. What I heard was a different level of engagement and understanding of behavioral, the habits or mindsets that might have gotten you to this place, particularly if you are like many NASH patients who come with obesity or type 2 diabetes. You're not just managing one thing, as well as when your life is going on around you and you still have to work or take care of kids and your family and all these different things. But you may have multiple conditions that will all be helped ideally by this work that we do. And so the opportunity to use Resmetirom to start this conversation about people's, whole health and whole metabolic health is, to me, I think, the real opportunity. And Louise, yes, our overall liver health, but I'm also, excited for my, diabetes advocacy colleagues and my, cardiovascular colleagues, to really have this opportunity to have this, make sure we have this conversation wherever, a person is. And so what are you, I wanted to ask sort of any concerns about this new medication. So we've talked about our excitement and the generally clean label, but there are side effects that are listed. Seem, I mean, everything's mild to me because I've almost died a few times. But so, but to a regular person, diarrhea or vomiting, or or some of the side effects, are very real. They are manageable. But I just wanted to go through, Amreen, what would you tell people about, when they finally do, well, after April or May, when we get the drug actually, to the specialty pharmacist and into your office to be able to give to your patients, and they start taking it. How would you, work with them, through the side effects or through any other concerns that they may have?
Yes, I mean, as we know, the most common side effects are gastrointestinal related side effects. Diarrhea was one of them, nausea was one of them, abdominal discomfort. So very, classical GI side effects that we see with a lot of these medications. What we do know from the trials is that most of these side effects were handled pretty well by our patients. I think the big thing here is just support your patients when they have these side effects. Have some tools in your office, like how are we going to manage the diarrhea, right? So right now the label is you can take it with food or without food, right? So, one of the things that I think about is, can we change the timing of when you're taking the medication? Can we, if you were eating it with maybe a fattier food, right, hypothetically, or more fiber, can we change it up and see if that makes a difference? So I think it's just going to be managing those type of symptoms. When people talk about nausea, like just in general with, all the other metabolic diseases they have, I encourage them to drink lots of water. I encourage them, just very homeopathic stuff, but, like ginger and things like that. Like, how can we just manage the symptoms? That's the most common things I think we're going to see. But I think they're going to be manageable. I don't think we're going to have, I don't anticipate us having a big problem with that. There is this thing about, your liver tests can go up with taking this medication. I think that's going to be something we're going to finesse as we do it. Like, I think the first few times that we prescribe this medication, we're probably going to be curious to see what are your liver tests doing, right? Like a 4 weeks in, like, hey, I'm going to check your liver tests. But I think with a comfort level, we probably won't even be doing that unless we actually have clinical signs that suggest that, hey, there might be something else going on here. The other thing to think about is gallstone disease in this with this medication. It's not an absolute contraindication. This isn't something that prevents you from getting back on it. So the thought is you treat it appropriately, like you treat cholecystitis, gallstone disease. You interrupt the medication, make sure the acute episode is taken care of, and then strategically get the patient back on it. So, I mean, these are some of the things, the kinks that we all will figure out what works well clinically for us. I mean, there's other things that we will have to continue to monitor, right? So one of the things that we do know is that the sex hormone binding globulin goes up, right? And like with this medication, what does that mean? Like, I don't really know.
What does that mean?
What does that mean in terms of long term, right? So there were some changes we saw in T4 levels as well, but there was no changes in the active component, which is TSH and T3, right? So are these
my patient brain heard sex and goblins. I don't know. You have to go back.
You forgot the other two words in there.
Say it in English.
Right. So hormonally, like, what does this mean, right? So I think about our PCOS population, right? I think about our menopausal population. I think about our patients who do have endocrinopathies, who also have issues with obesity, right? So I think about those type of things as well. But between the four of us, I think I'm going to be learning some of that stuff as I do it. And I'm just going to create lists in my head and in my EMR to track these patients to see, like, am I seeing trends? And, you know, and if it's worth reporting, we report it to the community, and we report it to our medical colleagues, because we are going to have to learn from each other. So there are those type of things that I don't know yet. But I think the more common things that we are probably going to experience with our patients, which are these GI-related side effects, I am pretty confident that we will be able to walk them through it.
Having had every one of these, side effects, I think, and, in my patient brain, if these come up in our Facebook groups, and like, well, diarrhea will give you some Imodium, take some Imodium. For the, pruritus, like rosamice, we have lots of lotions. There's a whole list of things, that the experts, the cholestatic folks of us, who've dealt with serious, long-standing pruritus, can teach you about that, for, vomiting, ask for some Zofran, So I think that there are, pro tips to managing all these side effects, and for particularly our patients or friends with with diabetes, pre-diabetes, who've been on metformin and have had like significant GI distress. We're like, well, less than that and not as persistent, so they have a frame of reference. And so I think when we start to break this down into the people's experience, I start thinking about how can we capture all of this learning, all of this early learning, and accelerate the sharing of it across practices. I know we started getting really good at it during COVID, creating some rapid response sharing between physicians and between health systems of what you all were learning and seeing amongst your patients. How can we do that in NASH, and how could we do that in liver diseases moving forward? Is that a role for GLI perhaps? Or other registries and things that are starting, because I don't want this knowledge to be lost. It seems so valuable. And of course, there's patient contributions to this information, particularly those of us who wear Apple Watches and Oura rings and track everything in a Lose It app and things. How can we get that patient information as part of this learning health system? Is just a thought. We may not have answers on this episode, but is that something that we can work towards? I will discuss.
Oh, I mean, I'm all for it. I think we should use platforms like the GLI to bring people together. I think we should be talking to our other colleagues in healthcare institutions or private practice or in the community, saying, hey, maybe we need to start tracking our patients. Why don't we track the first 3 months, all the patients that we put this medication on, and let's actively look at those patients and bring our heads together and bring all those patients together and see what are our trends, right? I think that's a good way of doing it. I think we are probably all part of some, consortium or something.
Exactly.
Some form of a group. We all have our people, just talking to your colleagues and saying, hey, do you think it's a good idea? First 3 months, as we're all learning it, let's put our heads together. Let's create a de-identified patient profiles and share experiences. And then eventually we'll come up with some form of a best practice. Like, hey, I think this really works well for managing diarrhea. Hey, this really works well for nausea. And hey, this is what I did with the statin and it really helped. And that could be some guidance. But I think that's what we need to do, and use platforms like GLI for this platform specifically to get it out to the population, get it out to the patients, right? Like, hey, I know this is new, but they're doing something proactively about it. And that just gives them more confidence as well. So that would be one way.
Okay, we got one vote. We got Dukin. I'll be with
I
some of
think
your folks.
yeah, I totally
Louise?
agree.
Yes.
Yeah, I totally agree. And working across between normal populations coming in for health screening to just see and be in advance, and feeding them into healthcare system, also from the healthcare system, we have a very simple app, which is available in the US and Canada, which allows you to track your day, diet, food, diet, exercise, and your drink. Now, that could be high sugar drinks rather than alcohol. Everybody assumes it's just alcohol, but actually it's getting people off full sugar sodas, things like that. Everybody said to us, we don't want to sit there doing calories. I know whatever I've done a good a day instead of a bad day. And I know my weekends are red. I enjoy my weekends, but I might put 20,000 steps in. And we use their FibroScan on their apps. So they can track their FibroScans in simple colors, red, amber, green, and watch the images. So it's not a medical grade app. So it's for patients or people who want to be aware of their health. And that's mylife365.me. So we would ask everybody going on Resmetirom to use that platform for us, because that allows them to see their results in color format. And it shows you that sort of, oh, that's how I rated my last 2 weeks or 3 weeks since I saw you. So it's crude, it's new, but it is an opportunity.
We might be able to turbocharge that. Maybe a past member of the US HIT policy committee, and a future member of the Coalition for Healthcare AI might take that on and supercharge that. So let's talk afterwards. Okay, so I think that this, I'll be ringing you afterwards. I think this is really helpful, because one of the things that honestly hurts my heart is when I know something as a patient that I know could help other patients, could help my doctor with their future patients, and there's no place to put it, and so solving for that problems, which is what GLI is built for, is what keeps me up in the morning, because usually it's not hemoglobin or anything useful like that. It's not like hydration or hemoglobin or anything good. So it must be innovation and change. We have an opportunity next week for the Duke Margolis Policy Center and their work with the FDA on advancing innovations in clinical trials. And so I think I have a right group of people, including regulators, to perhaps advance this idea. And I want to thank former CMS and FDA administrative commissioner. I think Mark McClellan's the only person who has held both of those roles, for grabbing me for his executive council when I was otherwise disrupting his panel and challenging him. That's what smart people do. I'll just put this out as a leadership point. When you have somebody who is challenging you and they're smart and capable, you co-opt them and you put them to work. And that he has put me to work for several years on advancing clinical research and making it more patient-centric. And so I think that there is opportunities here that we will work on even next week. So while we are closing up, I'm excited to start getting my marching orders and ideas from viewers and from conversations that have been had about what the next steps or the patient needs are, the sharing the information that does exist about the plans for patient support. I know there's going to be a copay card. So we'll start publicizing that to make sure that this is access. Start working with what things, smart phrases and things need to look in the EHRs. We have a relationship with the VA, so we'll be working with them as well to make sure our veterans have access to this when this comes out. What else would people like to see or add to my or anybody else's to-do list? Dr. Laster, I'll ask you first. What should be on my to-do list?
I think one thing, it's easy for myself or Amreen to see this information come out because we're people who are invested in this part of life, right? But I think we also get a lot of late referrals from maybe not even from PCP. Sometimes I catch it when I'm going through people's history. So I think primary care doctors, family medicine doctors, and emergency room physicians should be more aware of it, because I think still in those those communities, I think it's still just seen as, oh, it's just fatty liver, or oh, it's just pre-diabetes. If they're not in the emergency room for that thing, I think it gets lost in the shuffle. Or if they're not, if they're, being followed for their high blood pressure or something else, I think that just sort of gets pushed to the bottom. So I think just having them know a medication exists and know that it's important and they should be seen. So I think a lot, they have so many other things to do. They should just know, okay, refer this patient. You know what I mean? Just to know this is something that we could do something about is a big deal. Refer. Even that's all they know. They don't have to be bothered with, prescribing or the follow up. But I think for them to just know, so many patients, I see these images from, looking through their files from 8 years ago, and no one has said anything about it. So
I think that that's absolutely right. And I also want to make sure that we create, positive patient experiences, because we know there aren't enough hepatologists. There certainly aren't enough of you all who have with the interest and the multiple certifications and boards, and but I know that there aren't enough hepatologists, and they'll be preoccupied with the advanced cases. Not all gastroenterologists really are interested in liver patients. Let's be honest. As a patient with both IBD and liver, I know what interests most of the gastroenterology community more about me. So we'll encouraging, people, and we'll be trying to, let them know who's interested in treating NASH patients, who, has a welcome out for you, and have, refer to those folks. And then having endocrinology and primary care gradually more comfortable with keeping, these patients and being able to, manage them without referral. So I just want to be careful about that point, so that,
or at least just know. At least they just know about it and not just push it.
Yeah, but I think this is where we talk about education all the time, right? So for me, one of my goals over the next couple of weeks is to go and socialize or make them aware, like, hey, there's a new drug. And this is how it works. And I'm happy to champion and prescribe this medication for you. But I think the other part of this is, how can I make it really easy for you? Like, how can I streamline the process? And that's one of my initiatives here, is like, you have a lot to do. They have a lot to do. Primary care physicians have a lot to do. Diabetologists have a lot to do, right? So how can I help using technology, using our EMR systems to just help risk stratify that person, and happy to see them and help them. But at the same time, empowering our primary care physicians and diabetologists, like, I think you're more than qualified to take care of this patient because they do not have significant fibrosis or moderate fibrosis. So I think the need is even more now, because the thought shouldn't be, there's a new drug, let's send them all to hepatology. Right? We all play a role in this patient journey. And I think more now than ever, we, as advocates for our patients and for this disease state, like to really work with our primary care physicians and diabetologists to help them and to help us, basically, and our patients.
So, Louise, we have one significant thing on our joint to-do list. What else should either GLI or just the community think about focusing on next?
I think we're going to have the advantage in Europe and Australia of watching you guys develop. So we're going to come after you've made the mistakes. I think if we can get well, that's true.
Yeah. No, it's true.
We're not well, we might do with the NHS, but we're going able to learn and develop. But I think what we should be seeing is insurance companies now adding FIB4 as an automatic screening test for every patient being assessed. Fatty liver is not on the agenda of any insurance company. It might be on the agenda of a payer when somebody says this patient's got this condition, I need X. We need to be more proactive, and I think that's where GLI and that whole move is moving. Let's be more proactive in finding the right patients to get to the resources at the right time, and find the ones we can take off the curve before, because I think we mentioned at the beginning, different ethnicities have not been tested in this, but we do know that certain ethnicities will progress to cirrhosis quicker than Caucasian, and we need to be finding that population earlier to get them on the medications. But we do need to be collecting the data, particularly the cardiometabolic data, because we are going to find heart disease improves in a lot of these patients. Wonder why? We know the reason for that, but we need those figures. Diet, it is metabolic. We're regenerating our superhero. It is regenerating and supporting the orchestra that it conducts. So let's get there. And I think that's where we're going to be seeing. That's the one thing I would add before that. And then availability for early fiber scans, non-invasive diagnostics as part of those assessments now, but also workforce. Add it to workforce care, healthcare, because liver disease is the second leading cause of working lives lost in Europe. Let's target workforce. And I believe in that totally in the GLI. Public health is workforce health, and workforce health is public health, and liver health is public health. So adding those two things for me, just
and you're good. And you're and you're good. I think that thank you so much. I couldn't agree more. We have, we're taking our marching orders from all of this. And for any of my team who thought, okay, great, we got the drug approved, it's great. No, we're just starting. We are just starting. And I'm really excited to be at the forefront of this. And so thank you all for listening and watching. More to come. More, of course, will be available on the Global Liver Institute website, where we already have a special page dedicated to resources on this, as well as in our Facebook and other social media. So more to come, but thank you to my experts, guests. Please be sure to like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts and suggestions in the comments below. Join us weekly on Wednesdays at noon Eastern Time for more episodes of GLI Live. Check out our website, globalliver.org, and follow us on social media to learn more about the Global Liver Institute and stay up to date with the latest in liver health. Until next time, stay safe, stay well, and stay connected.